Hi, folks. Are you a MAGA extremist? Do you know any? Or do you simply have friends that just aren't awake yet? I want to tell you how I responded to an acquaintance of mine who keeps posting, MAGA rants on my social media. I'll call him Jim B for now. Dear Jim B, you are clearly under the sway of your God King, Trump. You care not that he spits on the Constitution, that he insults America's war dead, John McCain, Gold Star mothers. It doesn't bother you that he won his first term by promising to end women's rights to abortion care, that he's a rapist and an overt serial abuser of women, that he chose It's a Man's World as his walkout song during last week's RNC. You ignore the fact that he's a kleptocrat who was born into a large fortune and only managed to keep it through illegality, unethical conduct like fraud, tax perversions, and outright cheating those with whom he does business. You claim the economy was better under Trump when the facts show otherwise, when his only real achievement was a bloated tax cut for the wealthy that increased economic inequality, blew up the national debt, and fueled the very inflation that you now blame on Democrats. You ignore his utterly failed leadership during the COVID crisis, when he encouraged us to inject ourselves with bleach and to shove ultraviolet lights up our ass, all while the U.S. saw dramatically higher death rates than any other industrialized country. You ignore the fact that he nearly broke our NATO alliance and aims to finish the job in a second term, all while cozying up and praising the actions of ruthless dictators around the world. You decry Biden showing his age, while ignoring the bizarre, incoherent, off-topic mumblings of your hero who makes up facts to suit himself and goes on tangents about sharks and windmills and Hannibal Lecter. You accept his calls for military tribunals to political enemies like Nancy Pelosi, Colonel Alexander Vindman, General Milley, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and Adam Schiff, who have broken no laws. Yet, you cry foul over a special prosecutor who was duly appointed in the manner in which they've been appointed for 40 years since Nixon, and a special prosecutor who has 3 open and shut, very serious cases against Trump, but for the intervention of MAGA judges. You say the system is rigged against him, when in fact, every time he is brought in front of a jury of his peers and given the best defense his billions can buy, Trump has been found guilty of fraud, rape, defamation, and even election fraud. You're enthralled with his corrupt, billionaire-bought MAGA Supreme Court and the way they've created an entirely new framework of law that gives the president king-like immunity from any legal accountability, something they have done only and entirely to protect his fascist, anti-majoritarian, anti-American movement to end democracy and equality as we know it. You cry the victim over an attempted assassination attempt and applaud his crazy, overtly anti-democratic running mate who explicitly and without proof blames Democrats, when in fact the shooter was a registered Republican and just the kind of troubled young man that Democrats have been trying to keep away from guns for decades. Indeed, you ignore the fact that Republicans, especially Donald Trump, have boastfully said that the answer is more guns. Let that sink in. And when one most responsible for increasing and legitimizing political violence is Trump himself, by telling crowds that reporters should be beaten up, that there were good people on both sides of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, who allies himself with the Proud Boys and who says stand by. And you name as heroes the thousands of thugs Trump sent to storm the Capitol, beating and killing at least one police officer, all in an attempt to overthrow an election he clearly lost. You join him in shouting, "Drill, baby, drill," because one can only presume that you and Trump care more for a cheap tank of gas during the remainder of your miserable old lives than you do about the global environmental Armageddon that Trump and Trump fascist policies will hand off to our children and grandchildren. You ignore the fact that he had to pick a new VP running mate because his last VP won't endorse him or have anything to do with him after he sent a mob to kill him for the sin of upholding his oath under the Constitution before fealty to his fascist sovereign. It means nothing to you that save for Steve Miller and convicted felons like Peter Navarro and Mike Flynn, no one from his previous administration, his previous cabinet, will have anything to do with him, when in fact at least 44 of his previous appointees have come out explicitly against him, saying he's unfit to serve. And why do you support such anti-American venality and other incompetence? One can only surmise that this is because he, like you, embodies hatreds that supersede anything good or patriotic. I fear that just like Hitler's Germany, you and the rest of the Trump crowd see his anger and rage not as a bug, but as a feature. The MAGA movement is steeped in the kind of addictive grievance cycle that can only be satisfied by more anger and norm breaking until you become utterly complicit in a movement that has nothing to do with democracy or the American way. It's the junk food of the soul. It may feel good to you going down, Jim, but the more you eat, the sicker you're going to get. Do I think calling you out on any of this is liable to change your mind? I don't know. You're too deeply committed to your blind loyalty and rage now. You, I presume, are at root conflicted about what you're complicit in, but not knowing what to do with such discordant feelings, such elements of guilt, you double down instead on fascist fanaticism to protect your ego from ugly truths. Remember the parents who sent their 10 and 12-year-olds out to fight the Battle of Berlin in April and May of 1945? Same psychology. You, Trump, Judge Cannon, the MAGA SCOTUS majority, the mobs who laugh when he makes fun of a disabled reporter or LGBTQ plus people, you're part of a movement. You reject expertise. You want to tear apart the administrative state because your lives aren't working for you, and you blame people who seem to be part of the system, anything new or different from your imagined past utopia. So you rage and seek to fully break everything around you, like 2-year-old fascist children. You talk about restoring common sense to government, but what you really want is simplistic rule by strong men whose common sense is simply the kind of inside-outside, us versus them superstitions and prejudices that eschew expertise in favor of witch hunts and pogroms. The sad, and if it weren't so diabolically destructive part, is that your populist rage will, if victorious this election cycle, hurt you and Trump Nation nearly as much as anyone else. You may suffer a little bit less, and later than transgender people like me and other first-tier targets of Trumpy attack. But a Trump presidency will come for us all. Even those of us who are not now direct targets of Trumpy persecution will all be less free, have fewer rights, if you and MAGA are ascendant. We will all be less safe when Trump does the bidding of Putin and other dictators. He will finally break the post-war rules-based international system. His kleptocratic economic incompetence, his isolationism, and his SCOTUS-granted immunity result in such systematic corruption that the dollar economy will collapse, making it impossible for us to finance our national debt on favorable terms, and destroying the economy in fundamental, catastrophic, and unredeemable ways. Of course, it will hurt working people the most, but even Trump and his billionaire cronies will suffer a huge financial misfortune. And if the Trump fiasco foreign policy doesn't result in nuclear Armageddon, the Republican Trumpist fascist denial of climate change will hasten our own destruction as surely, if only a bit more slowly. Yes, you and Trump are exemplars of a confederacy of dunces. Your rage is misdirected, but will bring all of us to ruin. But, at least for a few more months, still a free country. So you do you, Jim. I can't do much to help you. But I hope I can convince those of you who are still asleep I hope I can convince you that this isn't business as usual, that they cannot sit on the sidelines, because the Trumpist movement that you, Jim, exemplify is a serious life and death threat to each of us. Think about that.